You are listening to the Launching a Leadership Revolution Corporate Education System audio series. Everyone is called upon to be a leader in some capacity in certain points in his or her life. This series is designed to offer training and insights on a variety of topics to assist the listener in leadership development and to becoming equipped for the inevitable challenges ahead.
Launching a Leadership Revolution is all about becoming a leader and why somebody should be a leader, the impact of leadership, where leadership takes you, and how someone grows as a leader. And I guess sitting here with you, Orrin, let's go back through and maybe chat a little bit about the book, how we got to the point of even putting it in a book and why it should matter to somebody.
Yeah, well, Chris, if you remember when we first sat down, I think we were on a private island and we were taking a look at all the different leaders that we know and all the different leaders we've worked with, and we're trying to figure out, man, what was the common denominator? What was the thing that seems like, some of them seem to be really outgoing people and others seem to be more introverted, and we're just trying to figure out what was the common denominator amongst all the different leaders that we know. And as we went through, I said, well, I guess if we're going to do that, we're going to have to define what leadership is. And we said, well, leadership's influence. And we thought, well, no, if you influence people in the wrong direction, someone may not be a leader, but they've written something that influenced. And so we started to having to define what a leader was. And we realized that defining what a leader is a much tougher objective than what we realized starting out. But I think the common denominator that we finally settled upon was every leader we knew was hungry.
Well, I remember that night we had started writing words down, and it became almost like buzzword soup or buzzword bingo. It has character, has ambition, has vision, and it just after a while you look at all these words and it's just a mess and it didn't mean anything. As a matter of fact, pinning it on the hunger of a leader was accurate because that is the starting point to anything that a leader does, because eventually we did get to the definition that we feel we can hang our hats on, and that is that a leader is driven toward a vision. They attack a status quo that they cannot let go. It's something that they have to change. They see an injustice, they see complacency, they see something that's not right, or they see something that could be much better, and they're driven by a purpose, by a cause, to attack that status quo and make it better. And they do that through their character and through their own performance and the influence that exerts on other people. So hunger became the starting point. And since then, most of the feedback that we've received on the book includes a surprise at that, because of a lot of the leadership literature that's out there, it doesn't necessarily pivot on the starting point of hunger.
Yeah, it kind of begins with the assumption, most books begin with the assumption that, everybody's hungry, but not everybody is hungry.
That's right.
You start writing a book and you make that assumption. To me, I think we need to start, and that's what we did in Launching a Leadership Revolution, is start with, it's your responsibility to create hunger in your life. You've got to figure out through the 3 levels of motivation that we cover in the book is you are responsible for finding out what drives you. And then when you start becoming hungry, you start learning things, and you can always tell where a leader is because a leader is driving change. When I look through the organizations that I've been a part of, I can always tell where there's a leader because a leader is creating change. So if you're listening to this and you're saying, man, I'm in a corporate America job and how could I possibly be a leader? Everybody can have influence where they're at and start driving positive change. And there's some leader in your organization that's going to notice that you are growing, that you are changing, and creating positive change in the organization. And when they notice you, they're going to want to partner with you because the world is filled with managers, but very few leaders.
And there's a big difference. I'm glad you brought that up between management and leadership. Leaders determine where to go, and managers are involved in how you actually go do that, the day-to-day administration of how to get there. And there are a lot of myths surrounding leadership that you have to be a certain stripe, or you have to be a certain position, or you have to have certain authority. But everybody, at some point in their life, probably at many points in their life, are going to be called upon to lead. The question isn't, is everybody here in this talk a leader or not? The question is, will they respond to the leadership challenge when it comes? Because it will.
That's right. It's like everyone is assigned a leadership task, whether it be a mother responsible for influencing in a positive direction their children, to a person in a job that's responsible for influencing the other employees around them, to a business owner responsible for influencing in a positive direction the customers to where they'll come back. Everybody is involved in leadership. And to me, the biggest leadership challenge right now, because the world being flat, is we have more leaders competing against one another today than ever before. And so America needs to raise up a group of leaders that will respond to the challenge and become positive influencers where they're at. You don't wait until when I'm president or vice president, then I'll start leading. No, you must start leading right where you're at, because it begins with hunger.
Everybody can lead at any place they are with what they have, the person that they are already. Everybody can begin a journey toward affecting change and making their world better.
That's correct. And, so you say, well, Orrin or Chris, what would I do right now to start leading? And the first thing I'd say was, what are you learning? In other words, are you reading on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? Are you putting the leadership material in? Are you putting information into your head that you can take and then start applying to become a better leader? It's amazing how many people, they say, well, I'd like to be a leader, and yet they read no information from anybody who's out there leading. I mean, there's a statement that success leaves clues. Success leaves clues. But if you're not in the hunt, you're not going to notice any of the clues because you're too busy sitting there while the clues of leadership are going by us. So you got to create a hunger, start reading, start listening, associate as much as possible. It's like the old Southern saying, if you hang out with dogs, you get fleas. Well, I'd say the other is if you hang out with leaders, you start developing leadership principles, and then you start applying those, and you're on your way to becoming a leader yourself.
And the impact of leadership is amazing. A lot of times people might think, well, I'm hungry. I do want to make change. I want to fix this situation in my life. I want to accomplish these things here. I want to change what's going on in our country. I want to help do this. I want to make a positive impact. I want to make a difference. And I'm hungry. I'm listening to this CD, aren't I? And so they're learning. They are doing those things. But sometimes people don't believe, again, it comes down to these myths around leadership, that they're the right kind of person, or that they're in a position to lead, or that they have any authority, or that anybody will listen to them. But we have to understand something called the ripple effect of leadership. When someone does something, there is a response. There is a response to every action, and leaders take appropriate, cause-driven, purpose-filled actions toward attacking a status quo that they're not happy with, that do have ramifications. We call it the ripple effect. If you can picture throwing a little pebble out in the middle of a pond of water, that pebble creates a circular splash, and that circle radiates, and other little ripples flow off until it reaches all the way across the pond to its edges, and sometimes comes bouncing back. And you can't say how far those tremors go and how long they'll shimmy the surface of that water. And what a leader does is very similar. It has an impact on the people around him or her, and from there, you never know what's going to happen. I mean, you look at the founding fathers of the United States and the Revolutionary War, and then look at the results of that brought down to our time and age, sitting here talking today in a free country and very thankful for our privileges and our freedoms and fighting hard to protect them.
I think what you're driving at, which I so strongly agree, is that leadership matters. It matters. In fact, I think in today's economy, that people are freer to buy products from so many different sources, to link up or not link up with anybody in business. And so they're going to make the difference. Leadership is going to decide the difference maker. I mean, you were using the founding fathers, and as you were talking, I went back to Winston Churchill. Can you imagine when Winston Churchill became Prime Minister of England? I mean, here's a guy whose whole life had been hungry. He'd been traveling all over the world, writing, leading, all these different parts, had many failures along with successes. But can you imagine anybody else being appointed prime minister at that time and being able to accomplish the results that Winston did? I mean, they had another guy, that Lord Halifax, they were talking about having him prime minister. And he said, if I'm elected prime minister, I'm going to go over to Hitler and settle. And Winston Churchill, as a leader, says, if I'm elected prime minister, I will never settle. He said, if it means that I'm dying with my sword, dying from blood, drowning in my own blood, I'd rather do that than surrender this great nation to tyranny and Hitler. Now think about that. Here's two, quote, leaders. But can imagine the ripple effect difference between, had Lord Halifax been prime minister, they would have never stood. They would have went and settled and given up their convictions and their principles for convenience. But Winston Churchill said, no, my convictions and my principles are so important to me that I'd rather surrender my life than my principles. Now that, to me, is leadership. And that's the type, when I read his story, it inspires me to ask, and everybody should ask, what are the convictions, principles that you hold so dear as the founding fathers did, as a Winston Churchill did, that you would literally be willing, if necessary, to sacrifice your life for those principles. Now, many people might be listening and say, man, I don't have any principles like that. And then I would say, well, then you're going to have a hard time leading with conviction to the point of drawing many people around you. Because Winston Churchill's convictions inspired a whole nation to stand up against the tyranny of Nazi Germany that now had dominated all of Europe. And this little island stood on its own against that tyranny because they said Winston Churchill's speeches were worth whole divisions in the army.
He mobilized the English language and sent it into battle.
Oh, that is exactly.
Well, you talk about those huge ramifications coming from one man and the fact that leadership matters and it has a huge impact. Well, the story I love about Winston Churchill was in 1899. He's a young journalist sent to investigate the Boer War in Africa. And he gets captured on an armored train. He gets separated from this other car, and they get captured by this cavalry, which is men on horses. We're entering in the industrial age. He gets captured by men on horses, and he's made a prisoner in the middle of the Boer War in Africa, and he escapes. Now, he's an unknown in England. He was born into wealth. He was part of the landed aristocracy and all that, but he was an unknown. He's just a young man, just a journalist in the Boer War out for adventure. But he escapes from this prison camp, walks right by the outer guards, had the audacity just to walk out of there. No food, no water, no plan. Climbs the fence, hides in the shadows, walks past the guard check, and escapes. Gets on a train, goes through the night, knocks on a door. He's finally starving. Time has gone on. He's starving. He just guessed which train would be heading toward the coast. Guesses the right one. The train gets off at a depot. He gets off. He walks around. It's dark. He sees a light. And he's so hungry, he's so thirsty, he knows he's going to die. He goes up to the door, knocks on the door, tells the guy some kind of a little fib or something just to see if the guy will give him some food. And the guy says, I think you better come in and tell me the truth. So Winston Churchill sits at his table and says, well, I'm a journalist from England. I got captured on an armored train. I've been a prisoner of war and I'm escaping. And the guy says, man, he says, you are so fortunate you knocked on my door. I'm the only one for 20 miles that wouldn't have turned you in. It was a Britishman. He fed him, helped clothe him, get him out of there, snuck him back. And that escape caught the attention of the population in England, and that gave Winston his first chance at a greater step. He was soon elected to Parliament. He became famous. He rose through levels of influence, and each time he rose to the occasion. That just goes to show, here's a young journalist. He never knew that he would be standing at the apex of preserving freedom in the free world in the middle of World War II.
That's right.
It started with one man just having the audacity to do something, and he got noticed.
What a great example of the ripple effect. And
That's the ripple effect.
And Winston being hungry enough that he would refuse to be a prisoner.
Yeah, and literally hungry by the end of the escape there.
Exactly.
That's right. Well, let's go to something you were talking about there. Now that we understand the ripple effect, and even a young journalist can turn out to be the man that stands in the gap at a very critical time in the history of freedom. Let's talk about this having principles and standing on principles, because that defines a leader. You and I have met these people. They look the part, they act the part, they talk the talk, but they're sailboats in the wind. They're charlatans. They're genteel, but they have no governing principles. When the wind blows, they flip and head in any direction the wind blows, whatever benefits them, whatever is pragmatic to their own comfort, their own peace, and their own affluence. And it's really the plague of our times. And that is not the kind of leadership we're talking about.
Absolutely. I mean, everything that you and I talk about is principle-centered. There are principles that we hold so dear that we're willing to sacrifice for our principles. A pragmatic says, well, I'm willing to change the principles to get the result that I want. But a principle-centered says, I'm willing to sacrifice poor results in certain situations for the principles. But long-term, the principle-centered person will always, in my personal opinion, will get better results because people will eventually no longer follow. They will not follow someone who's not principle-centered because eventually they figure out, you know what? They're willing to change the principles against me eventually if it gets to where it's more convenient for them. So to me, all leadership begins with understanding your principles and not being that sailboat and saying, these are my North Star principles and I will follow that star.
The higher one rises in leadership, the more it's about other people and influencing other leaders to also go lead and follow that example. And, everybody knows the Abraham Lincoln quote, you can fool some of the people all the time and all the people some of the time, but not all the people all the time. But there is another, you could take a version of that quote and you could say this, you could say that you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you are not going to fool leaders as they look to follow a leader. You're not going to fool a real leader. So you're not going to fool leaders. You're not going to fool people of quality that have character and that have a desire to do something great in life. You're not going to fool those kind of people.
That's
so let's
right.
just push that all to the side. And let's talk about the fact that a leader makes a difference, that there's, there are people out there that they're not really living while they're alive. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, take a look at any of the great companies, take a look at any of the great causes, any of the great charities, and you know that there was a leader somewhere. In fact, Emerson said that every great company is the shadow of a great man.
That's good.
Whether it's a man or a woman, it's somebody who had an inspiration, something that they said, this must change. And they had the principles, they had the hunger, and then they went out there and actually left their mark in the world. Now, if you think about the mass of humanity, most people are living their whole life. And they say, well, and what are they remembered for? Well, they had a couple kids and then they lived their whole life. And what are they remembered for? They had a few more. And it's like they're not leaving a mark anymore. People aren't realizing that this is their one chance. This is their one shot. Henry David Thoreau said, most men lead lives of quiet desperation. And I think one of the purposes of our Launching a Leadership Revolution series of CDs and books is to wake people up and say, hey, this is no dress rehearsal. This is your shot. Let's get going. Let's do something. Let's lead. Let's leave our mark.
And nowadays, it's not such quiet desperation. People are kind of noisy about their desperation.
Yeah.
They're getting a little loud and whiny. And, we're in an economy right now that's pretty interesting. It has people asking questions. It has people fearful and all these different types of things. And interestingly enough, one of the easiest ways to overcome that is to have a deeper purpose, is to rise above that and to keep your eye on something grander. You're talking about most people don't leave a mark. They eat their share of the food, breathe their share of the oxygen, drive on their side of the road, take up some time, take up some space, and then they die. Somebody cries at their funeral, they kick sand in their face and go back and eat potato salad, and it's all over, and they split up as goods. Stephen Covey calls it beginning with the end in mind.
That's right.
The other day, some friends of mine did some research for me and had someone trace back some of the genealogy, some of my family history on each side. And it's really interesting as I was reading through the names and the children and the marriages and the dates and where they lived, I thought, all of their blood is running through me, and yet I know almost none of this. They had to hire a guy to dig up the very fact that these people even lived.
That's right.
Much less, and my grandfather's father on my paternal side was named Andrew Jackson Brady. All we know about Andrew Jackson is that his mom's name was Melissa, that she had him out of wedlock, and that he had a hammer. Now, I know about this hammer because I've seen it. My dad has it, and I'm going to hopefully get him to give it to me. And on the stack of the hammer, it says Andrew Jackson Brady. So all we know, he might have been a great man. He probably a nice, humble, hopefully an honest guy. But all we know for sure is that he propagated the species, and he wrote his name on a hammer. Now, I doubt the day that he woke up and wrote his name on that hammer that he realized that would be one of the two most defining moments in his life.
That was his mark.
He left his mark. That's right. So Stephen Covey talks about beginning with the end in mind and looking back from the tombstone, taking the tombstone test and saying, all right, what do we want our life to stand for? We got to rise above all this temporal stuff and figure out what we're going to make our life stand for, what kind of a legacy that we're going to leave. And that's why we keep ending up on the topic of leadership.
Absolutely. I mean, Lou Holtz called the same principle the dash. I took my son to see his grandfather, my dad, who passed away, and I showed him the tombstone. I said, there's Orrin Woodward, and my son's name happens to be Orrin Woodward too. And I said, man, so he was sitting there seeing his name on a tombstone. And I said, you see that dash? I said, that's the most important part because, you don't control your beginning date and you don't control your end date, but that dash in the middle, that's what you have a responsibility. And we just walked around out in Columbiaville, Michigan. We're looking at the different tombstones. I said, you see, all of their lives are over. Their chance to leave a mark has come and gone. I said, but you still have an opportunity to leave a mark. And everybody listening to this, however much time you have left, that is your opportunity to leave a mark. And so many people, well, I can't start some big foundation or I can't start that. That's a misunderstanding of what leadership is. Leadership is the moment you take your eyes off yourself and focus on contributing into someone else's life. Making
a difference.
Exactly, making a difference. If you were to go ask the public and just say, excuse me, could you tell me the last 10 Super Bowl winners, the champs of the world? Chances are, unless you're really big into football, you're not going to remember the last 10 Super Bowl champs. But you ask that same person, can you tell me 10 people who have made an impact in your life? And they're going to be able to list off those 10 people. You got to start. Everything you know at the top, you learn at the bottom. So you got to start today and start saying, how can I make a positive impact into others' lives? You start doing that and you will build a following, because people love to be served and leaders are servants.
Well, because you will be different. You'll be different from the masses of selfish, self-serving people out there that are thinking, that are thinking small, and you will be different. And you have to be different to make a difference.
Oh, good one.
And if you spend your life trying to put deposits in the lives of other people, you'll have relationships, contacts, friendships, and you'll be so richly blessed just because you decided to put deposits into the lives of other people. That's what leadership is. Doing what you can, it motivated from your deepest reasons with what you have right now in the moment for the people that are around you right now. And you're successful in that, all of a sudden bigger opportunities will open up and you'll be ready again and you'll be ready again and you'll be ready as long as you adhere to those principles. That's how Winston Churchill went from being an unknown journalist to the ruler of the free world at a key moment in history. That's how anything big that's ever happened started with one little person doing the first step for the right reasons at the right moment in time and built upon that.
That's why I love living in America, because the founding fathers created this country with the idea that it didn't matter your race, creed, color, your age, what your last name was. Thomas Jefferson called it an aristocracy of achievement. And in a free enterprise market, your accomplishments are based upon your willingness to serve others. The aristocracy that the founders imagined in America was an aristocracy not of blood, not of what your dad's last name was or how much money you were born with, but your willingness to develop and launching a leadership revolution in your own life.
And to a certain extent, we're blessed with those freedoms that you can rise above your raisins, as the old saying goes. In later recordings, maybe we'll get into some of the ramifications of how high one can rise and the different ways things are set up and maybe some of the erosions of our freedoms.
Yes.
But, none of that changes without individuals taking initiative to attack the status quo and lead right where they are and push for things that are right in their life, first to fix their own house and then to go help in the community and build from there. And that's what leadership's all about.
Well, that's what we covered in Leadership and Liberty, is that leaders have always been responsible for maintaining and improving the liberties of the people.
Absolutely.
And so freedom and liberty, as Thomas Jefferson said, requires eternal vigilance.
Yeah, there's never an arrival in this life. You don't ever get to a place where you arrive. As a leader ascends the different levels of influence that we talk in the Launching a Leadership Revolution book, as a country goes down through the ages and the different generations, nothing is established that will last. Everything requires defending. Everything requires repair. Our bodies, if we don't take care of them, they decay. Our houses, if we don't, they need repair and upkeep. And freedom and liberty require upkeep. They require constant attention as you build influence and gain positions of influence in your life as you accomplish things. You don't just arrive and kick back and look at the fruits of your labor. Now, there's a time for rest. You don't have to be a fanatic to achieve great things, but you have to be focused. You have to be emotionally committed. You have to be sold out. This kind of could take us in another direction here. You have to be able to prune the busyness of your life and make sure you're focusing on the great at the expense of the good.
That's right. There's a saying, ideas have consequences. To me, ideas in a person's brain is like the octane level of the gas in a car. You can have the best car in the world, but you pour water into it, it's not going to run so good. And you can be intelligent, but if you pour the wrong ideas or poor ideas into your brain, you're not going to accomplish a great result. And it's amazing how many people out there, boy, they're hard workers. They're great Americans or whatever nationality they are, but they're not putting the proper ideas in. They're not pouring the right type of gas in to light that fire to go produce the type of results they want in life. So without those, you can end up being busy. But busyness and productivity are not one and the same.
That's right. Henry David Thoreau, again, keep quoting these authors, said it's not enough to be busy, so too are the ants. The question is, what are we busy about? There are literally probably thousands of good choices we could make with how to spend the 24 hours that are in our daily wallet. But there may be one or two only that are the great choices, the best choices that someone can use to move him or herself toward their destiny, what they're supposed to do while they're here on this earth.
The wealthiest man in the world is given 24 hours in a day. The greatest leader is given 24 hours in a day. And the poorest man or the poorest leader is given 24 hours in a day. So it's not that someone who is accomplished and has more time. It's what they're doing with their time. It's prioritizing and saying, These are the important things. I take a look and say, okay, my career, my family, and these big rocks. And once you have that in, then working around the big rocks, you can do some of the other activities. But most people fill their schedule and let the tail wag the dog, so to speak. And so they're busy. They burn through. I mean, we all have to have 24 hours in a day. But what a significant difference it is when you start to wag the tail versus letting the tail wag the dog.
Yeah, they're responding, and we all fall into this trap, I suppose, from time to time, responding to the urgent at the expense of the important, when really we have got to focus on what's important and let the urgent take care of itself.
So if I were to sum up, the beginning of leadership is create that hunger and decide that your life is worth doing something great, and that your life, the legacy, if you go to any town, you'll see the statues. They do not erect statues for critics. And they do not erect statues and on there say, John Doe, he stood for nothing. No, every time you see someone there, it's like, if you go into the center of town or any big city and you see someone, there's a statue, rest assured that person stood for something and was willing to sacrifice for their convictions. And then because they stood for that, that strengthened the will of many other people, and it created some movement, and a town was formed, or a town was defended, or they went over and conquered this, or they, that's the amazing thing about life is we are all given the abilities. Nearly everybody has the abilities to do that, yet so few do, because the last part of leadership to really pull it all together is courage. Now you know what to do. I mean, you can listen to the CD many, many times and you'll know what to do, but until you have the courage to do it, knowledge is not power. Knowledge applied is power.
It would be one of my greatest wishes that the people that would hear us talk like this and have this kind of a chat would get the belief in themselves and in the rightness of their principles and the firmness of their cause that they could stiffen their spine and muster the courage to do. Many times I run into people who just believe that they can't make a contribution, that they can't do it, that somehow it's other people that do these great things, that's those kind of people. I'm just a this or I'm just a that. And that is one of the biggest lies.
That's right. I mean, I think if I were to sum it up, you are worthy of success. You are worthy of leadership. It's not a matter of can you do it. It's a matter of will you do it.
I truly trust that there are a lot of people out there like you and I were not too many years ago who were on this same journey, discovering what leadership was, coming to the realization that, well, I guess somebody's got to lead. Taking a hold of the plow, getting to work, learning the principles, being hungry, doing the work, gaining the experience, growing in confidence, mustering courage from time to time to take some stands and to live a life well lived. And I honestly have to say that there are no regrets for a life lived leading. And anybody listening to this recording, hopefully you will be inspired to understand that you have the seeds of greatness within you and you can accomplish way more than you can possibly imagine. You have the abilities deep inside, bring them out, but it all starts with the first step, remembering the ripple effect, being hungry, start learning, and attacking the status quo right where you are, with who you are, with what you've got.
Unauthorized reproduction is prohibited. All rights are reserved. This is a copyrighted program of Life Leadership. You are listening to the Launching a Leadership Revolution Corporate Education System audio series. Everyone is called upon to be a leader in some capacity in certain points in his or her life. This series is designed to offer training and insights on a variety of topics to assist the listener in leadership development and to becoming equipped for the inevitable challenges ahead.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Welcome. Glad you came out. And we're going to have some fun today. What I want to do first is go through some information that I really think will impact you and be very important on your journey to success. And I want to start with an excerpt I found the other day in a book where I was just surprised to find this. It was at the beginning of a body of material that I didn't see this coming, but it was a wonderful little excerpt. And it's from the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave. He wrote in 1845 from Classic Slave Narratives, edited by Henry Louis Gates, Jr. I'd never heard of that publication, but this excerpt is phenomenal. And here's what Frederick Douglass wrote. He said, "The more I read, the more I was led to abhor and detest my enslavers. I could regard them in no other light than a band of successful robbers who left their homes and gone to Africa and stolen us from our homes, and in a strange land reduced us to slavery. I loathed them as being the meanest as well as the most wicked of men. As I read and contemplated the subject, behold, that very discontentment which Master Hugh had predicted would follow my learning to read had already come, to torment and sting my soul to unutterable anguish. As I writhed under it, I would at times feel that learning to read had been a curse rather than a blessing. It had given me a view of my wretched condition without the remedy. It opened my eyes to the horrible pit, but to no ladder upon which to get out. In moments of agony, I envied my fellow slaves for their stupidity. I have often wished myself a beast. I preferred the condition of the meanest reptile to my own. Anything, no matter what, to get rid of thinking. It was this everlasting thinking of my condition that tormented me. There was no getting rid of it. It was pressed upon me by every object within sight or hearing, animate or inanimate. The silver trump of freedom roused my soul to eternal wakefulness." Now, first of all, that's some pretty intelligent writing, isn't it? Most people can't write that well today in our society, and here's someone who was deprived of an education until late in his, I think it was in his teen years when he was finally allowed to learn to read. And it just cuts you to the quick, the gist of what he's saying there, and how important just that one thing, just learning to read, turned out to be in his life and is in his understanding of his enslavement and what freedom really meant. Well, when you hear about reading, many different things may pop into your head. Maybe you think about entertainment. Maybe you think about relaxation, passing time, something that's boring. I know that when I was growing up, these may be kind of the same how I would have thought about reading, because my mom read for entertainment. She'd read novels, and she'd read them 90 miles an hour. My father didn't read, and my brother and I were never encouraged to read. That was something you were forced to do at school in little bits, and I was under the impression that once I got out of college, I'd be done reading. I'd never have to do that again. But then I got a little further along in life, and some mentors got a hold of me, and I started realizing that through what some others had taught me, primarily Orrin Woodward, a best-selling author in his own right, and probably one of the most well-read men in our society today, really, if it comes right down to it. They taught me that reading is not a pastime. It's not just for relaxation. It's not merely for entertainment, although it can be all those things. It's certainly not boring, and it's anything but a waste of time. It's actually one of the most important things that we can do. I want to give you some statistics about reading just to show you where we are. Some of these are surprising in various different directions. In the United States each year, the total percentage of young people who claim they read more than 10 books a year is 56%. Now, to me, that statistic was a little higher than what I would have anticipated. The total percentage of U.S. adults who are unable to read an 8th grade level book is 50%. The total amount of words read annually by a person who reads 15 minutes a day. Now, hang on to this one. If you read 15 minutes a day, that's 1 million words a year. A reason for forming good habits right there. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. The total percent of U.S. high school graduates who will never read a book after high school, 33%, 1/3 of them. The total percentage of college students who will never read another book after they graduate, this is who I thought I would become, 42%. The total percentage of U.S. families who did not buy a book this year, 80%. Bad news for us authors. Total percentage of adults that have not been in a bookstore in the past 5 years, 70%. They always seem to be in there when I go in. They're in my way, taking up the only good reading chairs. The total percentage of books started that aren't read to completion, how many do you think? What percent? 92. No. Not my books. This is all books. Your average book gets finished apparently better. 57%. books started that aren't read to completion. These statistics come from statisticbrain.com, by the way. And so it might surprise you to realize that although it doesn't seem like reading is a big part of our culture, it always has been. And you almost can't find a figure from history, a standout in history, or even today, someone who's done big things who is not a reader. There are many great figures that were readers. I can go through several. There's some great lists. Lou Holtz, one of the winningest coaches in college football history, credits the book The Magic of Thinking Big as a turning point in his professional career. W. Clement Stone, multimillionaire businessman and best-selling author, says that Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich changed the course of my life. Donna Reed, Academy Award winner and early TV star, was a shy, insecure high school freshman when she read the book How to Win Friends and Influence People. Upon completing the book, she landed a lead role in the school play, setting the stage for a 40-year career in movies and television. J.W. Marriott, the president of Marriott Hotels, was so moved by the message of the book, The Greatest Salesman in the World, that he gives a copy to each of his marketing executives, or did. Dave Thomas, founder of Wendy's Restaurants, was a high school dropout with a poor self-concept when he happened to read a book called The Power of Positive Thinking. Phyllis Diller, the famous comedian, was a frustrated, insecure housewife when she read The Magic of Believing. The book gave her the confidence to try her hand at show business, and she went on to become one of the best-known comics in the country. Archie Moore, the former light heavyweight boxing champion who knocked out a record 141 opponents, wasn't much of a reader until he was cast as the slave Jim in the movie version of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Moore read the book to prepare himself for the part, and from then on became an avid reader, saying this, "Now that I've found books, I'm really living." One actor said, "I was enrolled at the University of Texas with the idea of studying law, but I wasn't sleeping well with that idea. I read the first 2 chapters of The Greatest Salesman in the World, and I knew right then and there that I wanted to go to film school. I changed my major the next day." Matthew McConaughey. Every few years, I pick another major topic and read it daily for 3 years, says Peter Drucker, management expert. I think he's passed on now. It's not enough to make me an expert, but it's long enough to understand what the field is all about. I've been doing this for 60 years. Pretty amazing, isn't it? So you hear some of these books are changing people's lives instantly, like Matthew McConaughey. Some become a method that people are using on an ongoing basis to become experts in a broad range of fields. I'm going to read you an extended excerpt here from a guy named Burke Hedges. It's just a fantastic story. It's about a figure that you've read about and heard about a lot, Abraham Lincoln. It says he was born in a one-room cabin in rural Kentucky, and his formal schooling added up to less than a year. His mother could read but had never learned to write, and his father could write his name and not much else. But Lincoln was fascinated with books. He learned his ABCs while attending school a couple of days a week when he was 7. And he practiced writing his letters on hand-planed boards using the burned end of a stick as his pencil. In the evenings, he read to his mother, and he read and reread Aesop's fables so many times. As a teenager, he sought out and borrowed books from every neighbor within 50 miles, including the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, The Life of Washington, and Pilgrim's Progress. Lincoln would read every chance he got. While the other youngsters played tag in the hills, young Abe was sitting under a tree with a book in his hand. When he took lunch breaks from splitting rails, he'd read while the others caught a catnap. Lincoln's beloved mother died when he was 9 years old. When his father remarried, the new bride, Sarah Bush Lincoln, brought a few pieces of furniture and 3 books to her new household: Webster's Speller, The Adventures of Robinson Crusoe, and the Arabian Nights. The young Lincoln read them over and over, and he became such a proficient speller that neighbors would pay him to write letters and simple wills for them. When 21 years old, Lincoln struck out on his own. He eventually settled in New Salem, Illinois, a pioneer village of 100 settlers located on the edge of the western frontier. It was a blessing in disguise. New Salem boasted 6 men with college educations, including 2 widely read physicians, and they freely shared their books with Lincoln. During the next 7 years, Lincoln worked at 2 jobs that allowed for long stretches of uninterrupted reading, first as a clerk in a general store and later as a postmaster. He would occupy the downtime between customers by reading widely in philosophy, science, religion, literature, law, and politics. In effect, now notice he was reading several genres at the same time. We'll get back to that in a minute. In effect, he gave himself a first-rate college degree by reading. We call that a self-directed education. It's one of the things we teach in the life materials. And in 1837, 28-year-old Abraham Lincoln was certified to practice law in the state of Illinois, even though he had less than a first-grade education. By all accounts, Abraham Lincoln was smart, but he was far from a genius. He wasn't a speed reader with a photographic memory. He was more methodical than brilliant, oftentimes writing out passages word for word so that he could remember them and understand them more fully. What Lincoln lacked in intellect, he made up for in common sense and determination. He understood early in his life that reading was the best tool available for advancing in the world, and he transformed himself from a poor, undereducated backwoodsman into one of the greatest men in history through the amazing power of reading. Now, some of those adjectives at the end could be debated, but he's certainly being talked about a century and a half later for stuff that he did, and he was very unprepared naturally to do those things, and he closed that gap by reading. We can go on and on. Harry Truman, the 33rd President of the United States, never attended college, but yet he was the one who said, not every reader is a leader, but every leader must be a reader. And he read voraciously his entire life. Napoleon Bonaparte was famous for reading nonstop all the time. And he would read when people went to bed, and he'd call men a fool if they slept more than 3 hours a night because they were cutting into the time they could spend reading and doing. Teddy Roosevelt was such a reader, he would read in all conditions at all times, no matter where he was or what he was doing. When he went west into the still wild west after the death of his young wife and mother on the same morning at the same time when he was in the house, he went west to kind of regain his mental bearings. And he ended up falling in love with the Wild West, and he became an authentic rancher in the Wild West. And he would read books even through all those things. One time in the freezing rain of winter, 3 banditos stole his boat that was tied up outside his land on a little river. And he tracked them down that river for miles and miles and miles, found them at gunpoint, and sat in the back of the boat with pistols drawn, pointing to those 3 men, making them row the boat. Even with all that going on, the freezing rain, 3 dangerous guys, he still read the whole time. He had a book open on his lap, and he held it open with his knees while he had the guns pointed at the banditos. And that's a dedication to reading right there. Thomas Jefferson famously said that when he has any money, he buys books. And then if there's any money left over, he'll buy food. Jimmy Buffett said it was his mom who taught him the power of reading, and that taught him how to be creative. Oprah Winfrey was only allowed 1 hour of TV a day by her grandmother who raised her, and so she decided to fill the rest of the time with reading, and she always had 2 types of books going at the same time, 1 novel and 1 self-help book all the time. The list like that is endless. I could give you example after example after example of people who have used the power of reading to turn their life into something magnificent and memorable. And yet, we heard the statistics that it's becoming a lost art. Even with the advent of e-readers and books are readily available now, you see where Lincoln, that one author said Lincoln was especially advantaged because he moved to a place where there were actually 4 or 5 other guys that actually had books. Bonus! I doubt that when your real estate agent sold you the house in your current neighborhood, she may have talked about schools, she may have talked about access to the highway, local shopping centers. She probably didn't mention the size of the libraries in the neighboring homes that you would have access to. That's kind of fallen away from our culture because books are now so plentiful we can, much like oxygen, take them for granted. But when it comes to achievement and truly honing your thinking so that you can maximize your life, books can be nearly as important as oxygen. We are in something called the knowledge economy. The knowledge economy. And what that means is that your real security, your real employability, your real financial potential is tied up in your knowledge base. Not how much you learned to this point, but how much of a habit you can make acquiring new knowledge to adapt to the situations and needs in your career. So anyway, there's apparently more to reading than just entertainment. Would you agree now by this point of the talk? This means yes. Okay, very good. It's the shortcut to excellence. You get to tap into the wisdom of the ages. You get to have conversation with dead guys. They don't listen very well. but they sure speak well. It's just amazing that you can read something that was written so long ago by some of the greatest minds, and yet it can still be applicable to your life today. And if they hadn't written it, those thoughts would be lost forever, but instead you have instant access to that, what we call standing on the shoulders of giants. Here's something else to consider. To really succeed in a big way in life, you are going to have to do a couple things. One is you're going to have to interact with people, like it or not. And two, you're going to have to influence and lead people in some capacity, some way, shape, or form, somewhere in your life. Those two, you can't dodge those if you're going to have a life that counts. Because a life that counts automatically involves commitment and contribution to other people. So to serve others is really the basis of how to lead them. You need to have a wellspring that you can draw from in order to have something to give. And reading is one of the biggest ways to fill your own tanks with something to give, something to share, proper attitude, proper focus and perspective. So understand that you can do it through reading in a big way. Reading is a huge key to all of the following and then even more. Self-awareness. How many have ever read something and you realize something about yourself? I know that I was reading Francis Littauer's Personality Plus, and it gave me so much insight into why I am the way I am. It helped explain, how many have gotten insight personally, like, oh, that's why I'm like that, good or bad, right? It can give you the awareness of other people. How many have, in similar settings, have read a book and it kind of gives you a window into why someone is behaving a certain way or has certain tendencies? I'll never forget reading the 5 Love Languages book, and it explained to me the behavior of my wife. Like, wow! So when I tell her I love her in this language, it falls on deaf ears. But when I tell her I love her in this language, it amplifies. So I'll stop the first language. That's wasted. And I'll turn that into this next. You got to read the book to find out. So it gives you self-awareness. It gives you the awareness of others. Gives you personal growth, which many people don't even do. They don't even grow personally unless you talk about what happens around the midsection. There are lots of people good at that one, but myself included probably. But personal growth means becoming better, maximizing, taking the things that you've been given and turning them into something contributive. Gives you a broader view of the world and of thought. Tolerance. Builds your attitude and serves your gratitude. Gives you understanding. Obviously develops knowledge. Builds sharpness. Clarity of thought. Keeps you current. Keeps you grounded. Leads to success. Helps you be more significant and feeds your thinking. And we could make a list like that that would go on and on and on and on. One of my favorite quotes about reading is, the average salesman doesn't read a book a year. And that's why he's the average salesman. Anonymous quote. Isn't that a good one? The average manager doesn't read a book a year. That's why he's the average manager. The average leader doesn't read a book a year. That's why he's the average leader. The average mom doesn't read a book a year. That's why she's the average mom. The average father. You could insert any noun in there that you want. It's going to be true. The way that you get ahead is to have an advantage. The way you get an advantage is to find someone who's gone further than you down the road and steal their secrets. And they're nice enough to write it down in a book that you can probably get for very cheap. All right, so let's go through a couple tips on how to read. We'll go through the how, where, and when now that we've got the why. We'll do the how, where, when, and what, actually, if we have time. Let's go through how to read. Now, the overall umbrella to put over how to read effectively, how to make reading a secret weapon in your arsenal of life achievement. The overall umbrella, mark on there, put a picture of black umbrella over your life and put white letters on the side of that umbrella. Everybody got that image in your head? And those white letters spell out the word habit. The way that you read the most effectively, the how, is to make it a habit. That's predominant. Anything else I'm going to say now are just little practical tips. But that's the overall fundamental principle, is you make it a habit. Now, if some banditos steal your rowboat, I don't know that you have to go as far as Teddy Roosevelt and read while you're taking the banditos to justice at the tip of open gun barrels. But feel free to do it if but maybe at that moment you could give it a rest. Number one, I would recommend, like Oprah Winfrey, that you read many genres at once. Many genres at once. I know in my case, and again, this is just personal preference, but maybe you sign on to this, I'll read a book on leadership. And then I'll have something on economics. And I'll always have history, maybe 2 or 3 history books going at the same time. And then I'll have just a basic success principles book. And then I'll have a classic going. And then I might read just something random. I'll just grab something in some random category I've never read about before. The other day I read a whole book on maps. Maps. I don't know why, it looked interesting to me, so I read it. And I learned all kinds of stuff, and I had my oldest son read it, and he loved it too. You just never know what you're going to find. Before that, I read a book on the economics of the sport of soccer. A sports economics book. That's not a genre I read in very often. It's not one I even knew existed until I read that book, to be perfectly honest. But it's interesting sometimes to read outside your interest area and broaden your horizons that way. And there's other genres too that I'll throw in there. But that's something you might want to consider. And one of the reasons I do that is because you can kind of get bored listening to one guy for a long time, as you're starting to do right about now. And when you read one voice, one book, one topic for a while, it can, sometimes it's good to just finish a chapter and pick up a book, totally different author, totally different category, and you can extend your reading, what you might call endurance, by doing that. You can read longer and stay fresher. Number 2, I would recommend that you highlight or underline as you read. Books are not to be worshipped. They're not to be pampered or preserved. I think they're to be destroyed myself. Now, that doesn't mean that you should walk into the museum in Jerusalem and start underlining the Aleppo Codex that they've got on display under the glass. That's probably not a good idea. But, some paperback book that you buy, off the shelf kind of thing, I think you should make it yours. Highlight it and underline it. Dog-ear it. I have a whole dog-ear system that I use, especially if I think it's going to be something I'll use later in a book that I'm going to write or some blog article I'm going to put together or even a talk I might give. I'll dog-ear it, and I'll even write on the dog-ear what it's for, book, talk, blog, or something where I think it might be appropriate. And then if it's really, for sure I have to use it, and I can't even get rid of the book until then I'll dog-ear the bottom page. So I have this whole, and you might have, but you come up with a system. Make notations. I have notations. I'll cross out sections. I'll argue with authors in the margin. I'll say, how can you be so stupid? That last point was brilliant, and this one contradicts it. But I'll put smiley faces next to a spot where someone makes me laugh. I'll put exclamation points. I'll write wow, whatever it is. Different things that can cause me to go back to it later. I'll outline books. Lots of times if I'm reading a book and it's something very, very useful and applicable, and it's very clearly organized. Sometimes authors are really good at organizing their material, and I can really feel the flow of what he's doing in that book. A lot of times I'll go to the back and I'll outline it. And so I'm putting together, okay, these are the 3 main points of being positive, and here's how you do it. And I mean, this might seem like a lot of work to you, but boy, do I remember it then. I really remember it. And I can even recall, that was in that one book. I wrote it in the back. It's the 3rd thing down. And I can be out of town and call my assistant and have him go on the shelves. It's the one in my office. To the right, 3rd shelf down, 5th book from the right. It's got an orange spine. Go in the back. It's part C. What does he say there? And I can't tell you how many times I've done that. So you might think that's a little hyper melancholy, and probably it is. But you don't have to live with me. But anyway, those are the kind of things that you can. Sometimes I'll write summaries on the front page of the book. When you open the book, you get that first page there, the first real page. Whenever the author uses vocabulary that I'd like to remember, a word that I don't know or I'm unfamiliar with, or I want to remind myself that I know, I'll write that word there in the front of the book. So a little ongoing vocabulary lesson. This is just stuff I do. You don't have to do any of this. It's just little tips. Then what I do when I'm done with the book and I've highlighted it and dog-eared and made my pages and argued with the author and exclamation points and smiles and all that stuff, before I put it on the shelf when I'm done, I'll go back through and read all the underlines. I'll sit down, take 20 minutes, and I'll read all the underlines from front to back. Just now what's happened is I've read the book. I had to read it when I underlined it again. So to underline a passage that you thought was good, you're reading it a second time when you underline it. Then I read those underlines again before I so the important stuff I've read 3 times, and I've only read the book once. You with me? Kind of a little trick. Now, The Magic of Thinking Big was such an important book in my life that I would read that book once or twice every year for years and years and years, and every time I did, I underlined with different colors. And you should see my original one. It's hilarious. I mean, it looks like Christmas wrapping paper. It has all these colors. And some of those things were so important that I took everything I'd underlined in that book and I typed them out as one-liners and I printed them off. It was 6 pages and I taped them across the face of my credenza at my desk at work. So I could be sitting at work doing something. I could look up and read all that positive stuff. To this day, when I read through that book, most of those phrases are kind of memorized. I'll get 2 or 3 words into a sentence like, I know where that's going. So you really learned it. Keep your books organized for future and easy reference. So I'll have like a critical section. These books really impacted me, and I'll have history. And the lady that kind of helps us keep our house clean, she really can't stand it when my books get dusty. And I have books all over the place, thousands of books. And so she'll take them down and dust the shelves and dust the book, and then she puts them up wrong. Like you mixed George Stephanopoulos book sitting right next to a Ann Coulter book. Like you can't do that. You know, they're gonna fight on that shelf. Keep them in the order I put them in. It's important, you know. So keep your books organized for future and easy reference, and then apply what you learn. As you're reading through a book and something strikes you, ask yourself automatically, how can I apply what I'm learning here to my life right now? Not, how can my wife learn this? How can my friends pick up on it? No, but it's you. You're the project here. Then discuss it with others and read at the same time. I already mentioned that. So those are just some of my personal preferences about how I'll read a book. Now, if you're into e-readers and stuff, I will only use e-readers for fiction because generally my highlighting and commentaries in fiction isn't as high. And I still find e-books hard to reference when I've done their electronic highlighting and classification. I can't, it's probably just me. I know they have great programs to do it, but I personally can't reference and access that information as much as I can in the old-fashioned stuff. So I'll just use e-readers for fiction. But it's all personal preference. But develop a system and stick to it and make it so you actually learn. The value isn't in the book. The value is in the backflips that you do to take that information and stick it into your life and make it part of your daily habits. Are you with me? All right. So let's go to where. Obviously, you can read a book everywhere. But you really should think through the wasted spots of time that you have in your life. We all have them. And one of the keys that you want to do is to redeem the time. Tim Marks and I were in Italy one time on a motorcycle trip, and we had planned to hook up with this associate of mine in Italy in Rome. And we were up in Tuscany, and the guy that came to pick the motorcycles up from us, he was late, and we got caught in traffic getting out of Tuscany and getting down into Lazio, and so we were late. And I texted this guy, but I never heard back from him. And anyway, we get to the hotel, we're meeting this guy, and we were late, probably by an hour and a half. And we're pulling into this hotel, and they're getting our bags and stuff, and up comes the guy, and I apologized profusely. He hadn't gotten my texts for whatever reason. And I apologized profusely, and he said, that's okay. If we're prepared, we can always redeem the time. And I thought, that's a great lesson right there. I got to steal that. If we are prepared, we can always redeem the time. How many times has it happened in your life where you get somebody stands you up, or you get somewhere early, or you get caught somewhere, or the doctor makes you wait longer than you thought, or whatever? There's lots of times this happens. I had a flight delay. Lots of times I'll charter aircraft to go to some of my meetings and some of my speaking engagements. I get back home that night. And there was one that was right kind of on the edge. Time zone differences, I would have been coming home super late in the morning. It would have wrecked my whole next day anyway, so I just flew commercial. And I regretted it almost immediately because there were flight delays on the way out, and I almost missed the time. They pulled me up to the door while the guy was introducing me, and I'm still tying my time. How you doing? Like I'd been there all day, and just barely made it because of these airline delays. And then the next day, there were so many delays, it took me something like 15 hours to get home. And it was an 8-hour drive. So I really wish I'd chartered. But guess what? I redeemed the time because I had several of my books that I was trying to work my way through. I was like, no big deal. I can read here just as well as I can read on the plane, just as well as I can read at home. Put in some earplugs and dig into the reading. So be prepared, like my friend in Italy said, so that you can redeem the time. So always have a book when you travel. Have them at the office for when you get a break. Have them in your home everywhere. Have them in your car for when you get caught in traffic or you're stuck at a cell phone lot waiting for someone to fly in. You're waiting to pick them up. That might be half an hour. You could get in right there. When you're running errands, you never know when your spouse is going to go in and try on some dresses or something. You might be stuck for a while. Whip out a book and redeem the time. Have them in the bathroom. Have them in the bed. Enough said about all that. All right, when? Always. Read all. Obviously, you get that I kind of think that's important. Just be reading always. Little bits, little pieces all over the place, and little snippets, concentrated times. Every now and then, you got to set aside some time to read. A reading day. But I thought, man, it's great to have a reading day. And so every now in your life, maybe think about, maybe not a whole day, maybe you can't afford that kind of time, but maybe you can take a reading hour. We do that in our family. Sometimes I'll declare, I'll just kind of think, my kids aren't reading enough, or they've done a little bit too much of this, or too much. All right, we're having a family reading hour starting at 3 o'clock this Sunday afternoon, and the whole family gets out books, and we'll get in a room together, and the kids have popcorn, and no one can talk. You got to read. You can't sleep. Can't watch TV. You got to be in that room together, reading together. At the end of that hour, we start chatting and talking about what we read, and most of the time, the kids want to go past the hour. And so now, I don't even tell them when an hour's up. I'll kind of notice, Yeah, we're way past an hour. It'll go 2.5 sometimes before they start running out of popcorn and getting suspicious, you know. But I would recommend setting aside some concentrated reading times. But more than that, I would suggest that you develop a habitual time when you can almost always be found reading. Maybe it's early in the morning. Maybe you get up, maybe you're a morning person like my wife Terry, and you can wake up early in the morning and then work out and then spend 20 minutes reading some other books or something, and then go do your job or your career. For me, it's the evenings. Once the kids are in bed, Terry goes to bed early, the house quiets right down. It's like a funeral parlor in there. And I'll get 4 or 5 hours reading into the night. And normally that'll be where I get my ideas, and I'll write stuff down, and I'll even start writing sometimes if I'm moved by what I'm reading. But most of my reading time comes either during traveling or at night. And since I'm always doing both, I'm always getting nights. Every 24 hours I come back around again. And I'm traveling a lot. Those are kind of my habits. But you got to find kind of habitual spots in your calendar, in your life, where you work it in as a natural thing. The habits in your life really determine what you make of your life. My father was 49 years old when he had his first quadruple bypass surgery. 49. About 3 or 4 years later, he had another experimental heart surgery because the bypasses didn't work. And then about another 3 or 4 years later, he had another quadruple bypass because the experimental surgery didn't work. I mean, he's really just a zipper. I mean, he's scarred like you wouldn't believe. But because all that happened, he lost weight and got in shape. He stopped smoking, and he started eating better. But the one thing he worked into his life was 45 minutes of intense walking per day. Now, he doesn't walk like those Olympic, get everything shaken. But he walks pretty fast to the point where he's sweating, and he's breathing, and he's elevated his heart rate for over 30 minutes. And he'll go to some mall and do that. It just anywhere he happens to be. And he's made that a part of his life. Like it's just a habit in his life. And if you saw him now at 71, I think he looks healthier, more vibrant, stronger. He still lifts weights. He's cut. I think he looks better at 71 than he looked at 51 because of one habit, walking 45 minutes a day. Well, reading is certainly one of those types of important things that I think if you learn how to read 15 to 45 minutes a day as a habit, I think that 20 years from now, you won't look anything like you do today either. I think people will think in many ways your life looks way better because of that new habit. Sabbaticals is another way to get a lot of reading in. Our friend down in Florida, he's on a sabbatical right now for the month of August, and he had listed to us in an email some of his reading objectives during that sabbatical. You might think a sabbatical is a big vacation, but for him, it's a reading assignment, very specifically targeted to what he's trying to accomplish. You may be fortunate enough to be able to take little breaks in your life where it could be a reading sabbatical, where you can get a break, get away, and hit some reading goals. Reading days, family reading times, I talked about that. All right, now what? What would you read? And here's what I would tell you. Only read the best stuff. Only read the best stuff. Life is so short. There is not time for you to read all the books you'd like to read. If you're like me, your eyes are bigger than your stomach. I can't read as fast as I buy books. So they stack up all around me, shelves all over the place, and nonstop trying. But anyway, life is short, so you can't read all of it. But here's the key. You don't have to finish a bad book. I read a big, thick book like this one time, just a super detailed history book on the Middle East. I won't give the name of it. But I remember as I was done reading it, I was curious what other readers had thought about this book. So for whatever reason, I went to Goodreads or Amazon, I can't remember where it was, where they have reader reviews of these books. And this one lady had scored this book very low. She said it was boring, which it kind of was. If you weren't a student of Middle Eastern history, it was pretty deep. But I enjoyed it. But she said it was kind of boring, and the only reason she finished it, she typed, was because she has a personal rule to finish any book she ever starts, no matter what. And I thought, that's got to be just about the dumbest personal policy. Can you imagine that? I'll finish any relationship I start, no matter what. Who would you be married to today? I'd be married to a girl named Karen I met in kindergarten. It might be a total waste of your time. So don't have any compunction about toasting one. Like, nope, this is stupid. Done. You lost your chance, Mr. Author. Too bad. So you don't have to finish a bad book. Only put good stuff in front of your eyes. Don't end up with some junky book that seems to be so popular, or some blood and guts thing, or something that totally violates your... Don't hang in there and read it. close it, and replace it with something good. And choose wisely what you read. I would recommend working from the top down. Think of the things that you wish you had in your brain and go after those books and then work your way down from there. Build a foundation out of your reading. Read wide, read strong, and read deep. After all, it's got to support your whole life. If you truly understand how reading really works in your life, it becomes the intellectual, emotional, attitudinal foundation upon which you build your accomplishment and make the monument of your life. And you can't put rubble in that foundation. You have to put good stuff in there. So choose very widely. John Lubbock said this, "The choice of books, like that of friends, is a serious duty. We are as responsible for what we read as what we do." That's good, isn't it? Andrew Carnegie, none other than one of the world's richest men at the time of his life, said this, "A man's reading program," notice that he's suggesting you ought to have a reading program. I'm sure he'd throw women in there too if he were in the 21st century. "A man's reading program should be as carefully planned as his daily diet. For that too is food, without which he cannot grow mentally." Let me suggest a place where you can start. Get the top 5 books that we recommend on the Life website. Magic of Thinking Big, How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling, How to Win Friends and Influence People, Personality Plus, and How to Have Power and Confidence in Dealing with People. Those are the top 5 books. And then I would recommend that you go through the books that Obstacles Press that we produce at the Life Company. Go through those. And that's a really good starting point. And then you can look at the different subscriptions we have. The Life subscription, which comes with a general 8F purpose book each month. The LLR subscription, which is professionally oriented. Books and things that are designed to help you grow in your leadership and your professional capabilities. The All Grace Outreach, which is designed to help you grow spiritually. Those are the 3 categories in which we supply books on a monthly basis to help feed this productive habit that you're going to get. As you go through that, and we have a top 50 book list too on the Life website, you can go through that and get yourself started on a habit. Because as you read, so will you lead your life. Make it a good foundation so that you can make it a great life. Thanks.
Unauthorized reproduction is prohibited. All rights are reserved. This is a copyrighted program of Life Leadership.